I feel blessed. I mean, obviously, I'm from Canada, talking to all of you today in the USA, and really happy to be here. My role is sort of unique. The bank I work for is sort of unique as well. So the BDC is obviously the Business Development Bank of Canada. And we are a bank that is completely dedicated to entrepreneurs, and that's all we do. So we provide business lending, working capital, equipment financing, mortgages, all the way up to venture capital. And we also offer advisory services as well. So in anything that you might need for a business. So that really is our core focus. We are always looking at how we can improve business and build business within Canada. It's a really interesting role that I've been a part of for over 15 years now. I once was an active lender, so I had a really large portfolio of clients. I have owned three businesses myself, and I feel like my history has brought me to where I am today. My title now is Senior Advisor of Purpose Entrepreneurship at BDC, which really encompasses the work that I do around the B Corp movement. And I'm also the lead partnership chair for our partnership with B Lab, the nonprofit organization behind the certification. And within that role, really focus on growing and supporting the B Corp community in Canada. So this is what I get to do every day. I'm so blessed. I love my work and really happy to be here today and sharing. So the next thing I'm going to do is share my screen and hopefully that goes well. All right, so just a quick check. Everybody can see this okay? Awesome, excellent. And apologies, I hope it's not a little bit too Canadian for you. I definitely talk about the global movement more so. And I have a couple of Canadian entrepreneurs that I'm really happy and proud to share. But certainly, this is a global movement, and in the B Lab world, it is B Lab US and Canada. So we are part of your global partner, B Lab US Canada. So it's really nice to be, sharing best practices across the border. Um, so yeah, as I mentioned, I am with BDC. We serve entrepreneurs. We have around 69,000 entrepreneurs that we are currently serving and helping at BDC. And within my agenda and my format, I like to go through the why we're here first. So, what is purpose? Why is this important? And what are we seeing globally? The next section is really to talk about B Corp itself, what that's all about. And if you've been to Florida, like if you were actually at the conference and you're familiar with all the folks on the phone call, you might already know this. So hopefully it's not too much of a too repetitive for you. And then in the third section, we're going to go into the B impact assessment, which is really where all the meat of the certification really is. And what I hope to achieve there is just introduce you to the assessment and help you use it for you and for your business. And so that's basically the three sections that we're going to go through today. So I always like to start with these lovely people and entrepreneurs because honestly, that is what this movement is all about. It is about entrepreneurs. It's about the people that we affect every day. And that's what draws me to this movement. So I wanted to introduce you to Annie. Annie Relu is a entrepreneur from Montreal, and she actually found that she was allergic to most products that she went to use, both for cleaning and cosmetic. And so she started creating her own recipes. And with this, she actually decided, you know what, I think I'm going to start my own company. And Annie is doing so incredibly well that she was just rated the top growing company in Canada. There was a lovely article about her in the Globe and Mail about how she's really leading with purpose and impact and how she treats her team. It went into great detail about how important her supply chain is and how she tries to keep that very, very local. And because of the way she ran her business, she was really ready for COVID. She actually did not have any interruptions in supply chain at all, and continued to grow, obviously, with cleaning products through this time, and is now in Costco across the country and doing incredibly well. And I really admire Annie because through this whole time, she really stayed true to her core values, which is really about creating this equitable company for all, and these cleaning products and personal products that are safe and unscented for those that choose that type of cleaning product. So Annie's a pretty incredible lady. The next entrepreneur I want to introduce you to is Jeremy. Excuse me just a moment. Jeremy is a really incredible fellow. He actually grew up in Saskatchewan, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with Saskatchewan, it's a province that's pretty dedicated to agriculture. Um, and he was driving with his dad one time and he saw all these fires in the fields. And he thought, what is that? And so he asked his dad, Dad, what are the farmers burning? And his dad said, the farmers are burning flax straw. And he said, well, why would they burn that? And he said, well, there's no use for that flax straw. And Jeremy, as a little boy, said, well, that's ridiculous. That seems so wasteful. Why can't they use it for something? And he held on to that idea and, of course, took environmental studies in university and then went on to create a product using that flax straw. And so Jeremy created Pila. And Pila creates phone cases and sunglasses and other products made out of this flax straw, which is completely biodegradable. It will actually biodegrade within about 4 months in the landfill. And so everything he does is about eliminating waste in the ecosystem. Jeremy is doing so well with Pila that he actually caught the attention of some sustainable investors. And so last year, he actually received investment from Jay Z. Yep, the rapper Jay Z actually caught on to what Pila was doing. This small town boy in Saskatchewan, who's actually living in my hometown, Kelowna now, and that's where Pila's actually housed. Um, found out about Pila, the phone cases, everything they were doing, and he said, "Yeah, I want to invest in your company." So that's a pretty cool story for a small town boy in Saskatchewan to actually attract attention like that in what they're doing here. So they're a pretty incredible company, and I mean, he wants to eliminate 1 billion pounds of waste from landfills by 2028. That's a pretty big goal. So I really appreciate Jeremy and everything that he's created. So next we'll talk about this fellow. So I think everybody knows maybe on this call who this is. It's Milton Friedman. He's an American economist that back in 1970 said that capitalism was all about shareholder return, and that's all it should be focused on. And what we found over the past 50 years is that actually hasn't worked out so well. And so now we're seeing change. And we have new leaders like this fellow, Emmanuel Faber from Danone. And Danone is an international company. Hopefully, some of you are familiar with Danone. They make yogurt and all sorts of different edible products. They are located in France. That's where their head office is, and that's where Emmanuel is. But Emmanuel really is focused on creating a company that's equitable for all. And so he really thinks about how they're treating employees. He thinks about how they're growing. He thinks about the environment and sustainable farming practices as well. So for him, running this international, multinational company is all about share a stakeholder return. And so he really is challenging Milton Friedman's philosophy that actually capitalism is about all stakeholders, not just shareholder return. And he's actually doing this so well. In their last loan, they did an international loan where they had over 12 banks come together, everything from a completely sustainable bank like Tritos Bank to an HSBC, an international bank that we probably would not classify as a sustainable bank. But they all got together and did the syndicated loan for Danone. And part of what Emmanuel negotiated within that loan was to incorporate the B Corp certification into the loan terms and conditions. So the better he does on his ESG performance, and for them, ESG, environment, social, and governance, equals their B Corp certification. So the more entities under the Danone umbrella that certify as a B Corp, they will get rewarded on their interest rate. So that's really the first time something like that has happened. But this is how creative Emanuela is as a leader. And this type of philosophy is really growing globally amongst multinationals and, of course, all business globally as well. So I'm obviously a huge fan of Emmanuel, and he represents the change that is really here. The next thing I want to talk about is that customers are actually demanding better. So, Unilever is obviously one of the largest product companies in the world. They have over 400 brands, and actually, only about 28 are considered their sustainable living brands. So, these brands have something that would include purpose and impact in what they do. So that would be maybe Ben and Jerry's ice cream or seventh generation cleaning products. But basically, there's only 28 out of those 400 brands that are considered sustainable living brands. And back in 2016, they actually found that their sustainable living brands were outperforming their regular brands by 30%, which was pretty incredible. But the next year, it was 46%. And this year, Alan Jope actually, I can't say that anymore. This is 2021. So back in 2020, um, uh, Alan Jope actually announced that their sustainable living brands were outperforming their other brands by 69%. For me, this speaks volume to what consumers are looking for. They're looking for trust and transparency. It's not okay anymore to deal with a company that's maybe not treating their employees well or, damaging the environment. And consumers are actually researching this. So I think this is a really good example from a product side on how consumers are really being discerning about who they actually work with. So obviously, beyond consumers, people are demanding better. So, 80% of global consumers agree that business must play a role in addressing societal issues. And 86% of employees believe it is important that their own employer is responsible to society and environment. We know that these two pieces are so critically important. Investors are also demanding better. So I'm not sure if you're familiar, but BlackRock, one of the largest investment firms in the world, about $7.2 trillion, I believe the last time I checked, um, is really, really challenging this idea of shareholder capitalism. And so this fellow is another amazing leader. Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock. And 3 years ago now, he wrote an open letter to the 500 companies that they invest in and said that, you better be thinking about all stakeholders and what you're doing going forward. And this was really bold. He really got challenged after he said this. His peers were like, "What are you up to? This doesn't make sense." But the second year, he actually wrote another open letter that continued on that theme. And back in 2020 now, he wrote another letter to these 500 investments and said that, you better be thinking about climate action as well, or we might not do business with you anymore. Now, Larry is an incredible fellow, and I'm sure that he really cares about employees and environment and, all the rest of it. But Larry is also a shrewd business person, and he knows that if any one of his investments is treating employees badly, has a toxic supply chain, is harming the environment, that's a huge risk. It is no longer okay to proceed on this. Now, he's taken this so seriously that back in 2020, he actually put about 250 companies on notice that they weren't doing enough on climate action. Larry is also now spearheading work to standardize how investment firms actually look at environment, social, and governance, so ESG. So he is really changing the investor world because he knows his investors are actually demanding better. So this was back in 2019. The business roundtables in the US, obviously a large group of a lobbying group in the US made up of all the multinational companies like if you think about Amazon, Walmart, and Apple, they actually wrote an article in the New York Times and said that is no longer okay for business to proceed on shareholder return alone, and that all business must start thinking about all stakeholders in what they do. So that was a really big statement. It was met with a lot of accolades and agreements amongst all these companies and, of course, consumers and whatnot. I would say in the past year, maybe we haven't seen as much action on this statement as we would like, but change is happening. And in September, I attended the climate seminar that happens, or the climate week that actually happens in New York City. Obviously, it was virtual. And many of the multinational companies have set pretty aggressive goals on their packaging, on their emissions and whatnot. So goals like 2030, 2050. So most multinationals have signed on and realized that they must do better and they must do better quickly. So all indicators globally is that we're moving to a society that's really going to think about all stakeholders and what they do. And business is such a critical role in the change that we need to see in the world today. So it's very positive. Of course, in the past year, COVID has been absolutely devastating, and it remains completely devastating. But one thing that has really shone through, despite this global pandemic, is this focus on people, as I mentioned in the beginning. This focus on, companies buying local, going to your corner store and actually supporting them during this really difficult time because so many small business have been affected by this. The other thing that's been so prevalent is the idea of JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. It must be a part of our dialogue going forward. And so we need real action on these things. So, despite the pandemic, all of the themes that we've been talking about today remain really important. And I think almost has shone a light on how important this is for us globally. So, hopefully, by telling you the stories of Annie and Jeremy and Emmanuel, that's made some sense to you. And the one common thread, of course, between these three entrepreneurs that I spoke about, they're all B Corp certified. And so are many, many other entrepreneurs. And in fact, right now, I think the US is at about 1,362 certified B Corps. In Canada, we have just about almost 300 certified B Corps. And so now, with this idea of what's happening globally and really talking about this why, let's talk about the B Corp certification and what this means. So, in the last 20 years, there's been lots of certifications out there that is still really valid and many, many businesses use, but they basically focused on the product or the process. So, for example, a certified organic apple or a LEED certified building or ISO certification to certify a process. But now what we're seeing in the 21st century is good companies because it's maybe not okay that you are selling a certified organic apple if possibly you weren't even paying a living wage. And so it's important for the whole company to be thinking about everything that they do. And really, that's what B Corp certification is all about. I always say that B Corp is ESG plus purpose and impact. So it's a certification, and more importantly, an assessment that helps you start to measure everything that matters to you as an organization and helps you to think about ways that you might improve. For me, there are three steps to certification. The number one is that you have to be an entrepreneur that is committed to this. If this doesn't really seem to jive with your values and the way you want to run your business, perhaps B Corp certification is not for you, and that's okay. But I think it's really important that the decision to become B Corp is really top down and that is felt by all the employees. That really is the power of this certification, that it actually matters to everybody at the organization. The next thing to think about is performance. So I've mentioned this B impact assessment, and you must score 80 out of 200 points to actually achieve B Corp certification. And the third thing is to change your articles of incorporation to consider all stakeholders. So, who can certify? Any for profit company of any size, any industry, any geography, any legal structure that is for profit, and you must be in business for at least 18 months. Now, I often get the question here, I'm a nonprofit. Why can't I certify? This really sounds like me. The certification was actually developed for profit businesses so that they could actually incorporate a lot of purpose and impact in what they're doing. Nonprofit companies, obviously, their core purpose is that. So while they can use the B Impact assessment, they just can't certify. Any industry and any geography is very true. There are some minor exceptions that they won't certify, or there are controversial issues around, and they're pretty clearly outlined within the B Impact assessment. Any legal structure. So, if you are a benefit corporation, like we mentioned, that we'll talk about here in a little bit further, if you're a co op, and sometimes there are other legal structures of for profit companies that do exist based on your state or where you're located. As long as they're for profit, then you can probably certify with that incorporation. And the reason why you have to be at least 18 months old is that you do need your first set of financial statements. And typically, you generally receive that within about 14 to 18 months after your year end. Now, I've been in business for over 20 years, actually over 30 years now. What am I saying? Um, and I have met probably close to 4,000 entrepreneurs that I've helped and assisted either through consulting or through financing. And every time I've gotten to know these entrepreneurs, they care about their businesses. They care about the employees that are working for them. They really care about their communities. And so I am a firm believer that we have an awful lot of B Corp-ish type companies out there and B Corp-ish entrepreneurs that really care about what we're talking about today. So while certification can be difficult and it really is a journey, it can take a few years for some folks. I believe that almost everybody can be B Corp-ish. So the really wonderful thing is that B Lab has actually made the B Impact Assessment available to everyone. So whether you're nonprofit, for profit, want to certify, don't want to certify, you have actual access to the B Impact Assessment. It's available to all entrepreneurs. It's free, it's confidential, it's benchmarked against actually 100,000 entrepreneurs worldwide. That number was recently updated for me, so I couldn't believe how much it had jumped in the past year. So it's actually 100,000 other users of the B Impact Assessment. There are 86 different assessments. So when you actually create your assessment, it will ask you where you're located, how many employees you have, and what is your specific industry. And with that information, it will produce the appropriate assessment for you. So it's basically customizable and will reflect who you are as an organization. There are so many tools, guides, examples, and resources embedded within the assessment, and I'll show you exactly where to find all of that information. So it can even be used as a tool as you're planning and you're strategizing. So for companies that are just starting out, so they're startup companies, I always say, log into the Be Impact assessment and use it as a guide as you build out your policy and procedures and you think about how you're going to grow your business. And for those that are, going through growth strategies or really wanting to look at where they're taking their business, it's an incredible strategy tool. Do remember one thing when you go through the Be Impact assessment. Measure what matters to you most. Just because they're asking a question does not necessarily mean that you have to have that or that you yourself have to do this. Perfection is not the goal. This is very much a journey. So, one of the things that I find if folks have logged into the Be Impact assessment, it usually starts them off in the governance section and it will start asking some pretty tricky questions. So, if you're a small to medium sized business, you probably don't have a board of directors and you probably don't have some of these things, but that's okay. You may get there someday, but it's okay that you don't have these things. The assessment is definitely weighted based on what's important. And so there's opportunities to achieve points in each section based on what you're doing really well. So really keep that in mind. As I mentioned, the B impact assessment, you do have to score 80 out of 200 points. Now, that bar was set 14 years ago when the first B impact assessment was actually created. And the founders took it to over 2,000 entrepreneurs globally throughout the world and asked them to complete it. And what they did find was that most traditional companies would come in around the 55 mark, maybe sometimes even below that, just depending. Companies that have maybe had a strong CSR, so corporate social responsibility report, maybe would inch higher up to around the 70 points. But companies that were really doing everything and really diving into this information, they would score around 80 points. So even though it's not 50% of 200 points, it's still really hard to achieve. And most companies will certify between about the 80 and 95 points the very first time. So it's okay to submit at like 85 points. You're still doing absolutely incredible. So I want to really reiterate that 80 points is amazing. It's a journey. So as we talk about this today, some people maybe haven't even logged into the assessment. B Corp is new to them. Others have been on this journey maybe for 2 or 3 years trying to improve their practices and change things. And it takes time, and that's okay. You'll see here that Eileen Fisher, Patagonia, and Ben& and Jerry's all certified at a much lower rating, but have taken the assessment and used it as an opportunity to really improve their score year over year. So they're really looking at it as a journey of improving their practices and just getting better and better. So let's talk about the legal framework. So, specifically in the United States, 14 years ago, when they launched the B Corp assessment and the B Corp certification, what they found is that some folks that were very B Corp-ish, like say Patagonia, went to be a founding B Corp and they actually couldn't do it because when they went to make the legal change to their articles of incorporation, it was actually illegal. They weren't allowed to do this. And this was actually the theme in many states. So, what they ended up doing was actually creating a completely new law that's called the Benefit Corporation legislation. And they introduced this and it became law in California. And that's when actually Patagonia could certify because they actually became a benefit corporation, which satisfied the legal framework required for B Corp certification. Now, benefit corporation legislation now exists in, I think, 37 states, and it just keeps growing. So, for most of the folks in in the US, you will want to check whether or not you have benefit corporation legislation, because in those states, you'll want to become a benefit corp. And in the states that don't have that, it's probably okay just to change your articles of incorporation. On the bcorporation.net website, it specifically tells you what you need to do for your legal change. So that information is very visible and accessible. I do want to reiterate that B Corp certification is different from benefit corporation legislation. I know they're super similar, and I'm sure they probably wish they named them two separate things so it wasn't so confusing. But the benefit corporation legislation is the legal requirement that you need to meet to become B Corp. So you can actually incorporate as a benefit corporation company and not be B Corp certified. And in fact, in the US, I think you're up to about 8,000 benefit corporations. And as I mentioned before, you're sitting at about almost 1,400 B Corp certified companies. So there is a momentum to have a company that's considering all stakeholders. And that's really positive, but not all have achieved B Corp certification yet. So hopefully that makes sense. So globally, we're actually at about 3,700 B Corps now, almost up to 3,800. So we're growing fast, growing as fast as B Lab can keep up to. There's a long list of people that are looking at certification and in the queue right now, in 75 countries in 150 different industries. So it really is a global movement of companies that really want to do business as a force for good. So I'd like to pause here and just open it up to everybody on the line. I've gone through the why and I've gone through B Corp certification. I want to know if you can sort of start thinking in your mind and identifying possible benefits to certifying. So I'm happy to open it up. I don't think we have too many people on the line. So, oops, I don't want you to see that. We have 27 people on the line. So I think we can just do it by taking yourself off mute and maybe sharing some of the benefits that you're seeing today.
Carla, I have a question.
Yeah.
Um, just to kind of recap, I want to make sure I understand that in order to be B Corp certified, the articles of incorporation have to reflect that you are a benefit corporation in the state. So if I'm going to do this, I need to change my articles of incorporation.
Yes, possibly. So I'm not sure where you're located, and I'm not 100% sure if your state has benefit corporation legislation,
Well, they
but
do.
they do. Okay, so what you'll have to do is you will have to become a benefit corporation as well. Yeah, that's
As
part of the
opposed,
legal
so
change.
so I don't need to necessarily change. I can amend. So like I'm an
Yes,
LLC, I have a partnership.
perfect. Yeah,
So I would be an LLC and a B Corp.
that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And Carla, there's one more question in the chat. I put a
Great.
link in the chat to see if your state has benefit corporation status. And someone asked if there's a Canadian alternative to benefit corp.
A Canadian alternative. Well, thanks for asking that. So there happens to be a benefit corporation legislation in BC. And it was actually, it just passed about a year ago and it became active in July of 2020. So many folks are actually switching to that, but it's only in British Columbia. So one of our provinces. So the rest of the provinces have to amend their articles of incorporation. But in Canada, it's not illegal to do so. And in fact, our federal Incorporation Act, Business Incorporation Act, includes that you may consider all stakeholders. It's not that you must, but it may consider all stakeholders. So so while it's not a requirement for us to have benefit corporation legislation, the folks in BC really felt they really wanted that, and all stars aligned with the current government and whatnot. They all supported, and it did pass in British Columbia.
So Carla, if we're in Ontario, in order to become B certified, we don't need to amend?
You will need to amend your articles of incorporation, so your existing incorporation, and you just need to add a passage, which is located on on the bcorporation.net website for you. Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem.
Carla, I'm with Lynn University in Boca Raton, Florida. We work very closely with Jennifer Moreau in Florida for Good. We
Great.
work with a student consultancy group that helps for-profit businesses become certified B Corp to qualify for it. One question I have is we also work with nonprofit organizations. 501c3 is the internal revenue statement for them.
Hmm.
In the United States, at least, I'm not sure how it is in Canada, but a certified or a 501c3 nonprofit organization can also start a for-profit arm that is income generating for them. And my question is, can the for-profit arm, which is a social enterprise as we see it, but run as a business for profit, and the profits usually go into the nonprofit to sustain it, can they become a certified B corporation?
It's possible, but we'd have to look at the organizational structure, and I would definitely get the okay from BLAB before you went down that road. A
Okay,
little bit further on in this presentation, I'm going to show you where you can find certain information, and we'll pull that up for you. There's a lot of information embedded within the assessment through a support area. And so, we'll pull that up and you can take a look at that.
great. Again, the reason for that is, as I see it, is, bake sales and car washes just don't make it anymore
Yeah,
in terms of income generation. So if they have a for-profit entity within the nonprofit, they have a steady stream of income coming in, and that is usually run by a separate person than the executive director of the nonprofit. A business, the mindset is different as well in many cases, but they can be complementary. And it really relates to, I think, again, sustainability for nonprofit organizations by having a for-profit arm.
I
That it has
completely
to
agree
match
with
the
you.
mission of the organization. That's the one
Yeah,
condition.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Um, I completely agree with you, and we're seeing a lot of that. I mean, that's how a lot of nonprofits are being able to do the work that they want to do is by creating a for-profit arm. It's actually very important in these days. So yeah, for sure. And we'll take a look at that, and you can just read through how they've outlined that, and just to make sure that it's aligned with what you're saying. And if we have any questions, we can certainly go to B Lab about that too, and I can show you how to do that as well.
Thank you.
No
Great.
problem. Any other questions before we go on to benefits?
Carla, I have a question.
Sure.
I'm I work with a consulting firm that's very involved in the B Corp movement, and we've looked at the economic impacts of a stakeholder based model locally, and seen solid evidence that it leads to a better economic return. But I'm wondering if these BlackRock folks or the consortium of banks that supported Danone's addendum to have B Corp certification be part of their loan package. If there's global data that shows a correlation between a higher B Corp certification score and economic performance. And I mean, at the root of my question is, is there an agnostic way that you could make a case to the Friedman School hardliners, that this is a more effective path forward, regardless of their interest in stakeholders in general?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we're seeing it in a few different in a few different veins. So if we look purely at BlackRock and investors, the reason why ESG is so important is that they know that there's a complete return on investment. if you're investing in ESG within your organization, and it's actually critical to your success. That's why it's such a growing conversation. So definitely in the investment world, they're recognizing that their companies must actually operate that way. So really be thinking about these factors. From a B Corp perspective, within your own organization, is there a return on investment? Let's just take a look at the benefits for certifying here. I'm just going to bring them up here. So if I look at this and I go through these main areas, it might help to answer that question and frame what you're asking. So if we look at maintaining mission, a lot of the work that I do is introducing the B Corp certification to folks and then helping them through that process. I have a cohort that's called Getting to 80 that I sponsor and we host. Um, and what I was really surprised at is that most folks coming into the Getting to 80 program have an intention to certify. They're obviously a company with purpose and impact, but they actually don't actually understand where they want to have purpose and impact. A lot of the time is actually spent on saying, okay, exactly where is it you want to focus your energy, because they want to save whales and plant trees, and they want to do this, they want to do that. They really need to hone in on exactly what is your mission and what does that mean to you internally and externally. So that actually surprised me. So even though you've got a company that really wants to have purpose and impact, sometimes there has to be some fine tuning to exactly what that looks like. So maintaining your mission is so important. And it's one of the benefits when you actually go through the assessment, because if you can't tell your employees what you're really up to, or actually send that message to your clients, you likely won't be successful, or there will be some bumps in the road. The next one is differentiating from pretenders. Well, that's pretty obviously one. There's lots of people out there that are greenwashing. And so the actual certification, if you achieve that, will sort of verify that you actually are doing what you're doing, because you've had a third party verify you are doing what you're doing. The benchmarking and improving performance, of course, you become this member of these 100,000 other users, um, globally, and you're able to see what they're doing, and there's a lot of best practices that are going on, and quite innovative practices, really challenging the status quo on the way to do things. And so there is a lot of data out there on specific benchmarks, etc., that are really helpful for businesses to know whether or not they want to go on this. The next thing is attracting engaging talent. And I would say that if you do nothing else, take a look at the employee section, because it is really hard actually to attract and engage and maintain your talent within your organization. And if you have high employee turnover or low morale, that can cost your company so much. Whereas if your employees are actually completely engaged, they're bringing their whole self to work, they're really working towards that mission that is so clearly understood, you're going to be a very, very tight company and be able to be quite profitable. You'll be able to adjust when there are bumps in the road very quickly, um, all while maintaining that morale within your organization as well. So that is one area where there's a direct return on investment. Treat your employees well, have good employee practices, and you will see immediate benefits from that. Collaboration is something we don't normally see in the general business world, but you really see it in the world of purpose and impact companies. So there's an opportunity to really collaborate with peers. As I mentioned, because you're doing all these things about really focusing on your mission and all the rest of it, you can really save money and access services that are quite unique. Partly because you're really making sure that you're running a very tight ship. And the other side is that you're connected to this community of pretty innovative entrepreneurs. You can really generate press. The one thing though is that often people have said to me, oh, it's just a PR exercise. That's the only reason why these people are becoming B Corp certified. Honestly, it's way too complicated just for a PR exercise. And you won't maintain it unless it's authentically something that your business really believes in. So the press that you're generating is generally that you're really able to communicate who you are as an organization and the good that you're doing within the world and the reason why you're doing this. So I think that's why you generate press and you're able to talk so confidently and clearly about your business, about your products, and the good that you're hoping to create in the world. That piece alone can be very, very powerful and a huge return on investment. And finally, raising capital. As I mentioned, ESG is so important. You've got BlackRock, you've got Bain Capital in the US that, are really looking for sustainable investments now. I mean, the priority is to look for those companies that are really worth investing in. You've had like Lemonade was one of the largest companies that went public this year and they're B Corp certified. And I have a whole bunch of other ones that I can actually mention to you as well, so it's definitely an attraction piece for those that have actually gone through it, because in part going through the B Corp certification is also completely transparent as well. All your results are listed on the website, and there's a piece of trust there that is hard to sort of develop within your organization, but definitely going through this certification really helps with that trust piece. That's something we've really noticed at BDC too, is our trust factor is really high, in part because of the business that we actually operate, but also because we're very transparent. We are very, very clear on what our purpose and our mission is. And so there's no question, like we're not going to all of a sudden start an ice cream shop. We know exactly what we're here to do, so I think all of those benefits really talk and speak to the return on investment. Hopefully that answers your question.
Carla,
Okay,
I've got
Thank you.
one other question.
yeah.
This is Jerry again in Florida. I noticed that in following research in B Corp, that Etsy a while back changed CEOs because the stakeholders felt that the B Corporation, at least this is what I've read, and you can straighten me out, actually interfered with their profit margin. And therefore, they replaced that CEO with another CEO that was making a number of different changes. And then Etsy took away the B Corporation certification. Do you see any trends of that, or any situation like that people point to about once they become a B Corporation, they've had to sort of step back a bit from it?
There definitely are situations like that. I think Etsy was a very early adopter of it. It was unfortunate to see that happen. There are definitely situations where companies are purchased, and a lot of it is when there's been an acquisition, their legal framework hasn't been able to be maintained. And so that's quite a reason why, sometimes they lose their certification. So there's a number of different reasons. What I see most, and I'm just reviewing the stats in Canada on this, is that companies certify and they're just unfortunately too small and they don't make it. So they may have gone out of business or they sold. And so that's primarily the reason why they don't recertify, because you have to recertify every 3 years. And then it could be because they've sold to a larger organization that can't meet the legal requirement, or they may just have felt that another certification, maybe more industry specific, is a better choice for them based on their goals as an organization. It's important to remember that you can be very B Corp-ish and not certify. So that is possible. So it has to mean something to your organization that you're actually taking this next step to certify.
Have you
But that's
found any
usually what
kind
I
of
see.
excuse me,
Yeah.
have you found any kind of research done on the impact of COVID on businesses, whether they will become a B Corp and maybe not so many wanting to become B Corp now, or some who were B Corp who felt that it was interfering with so many other things dealing with COVID? Is there any research on that yet or not?
I don't think it's interfered at all from everything that I've seen,
Okay,
but this is just like, because I'm involved in the B locals across the country, so US and Canada, everything we've heard. In fact, it's been sort of something that has really helped them through this time because of the
okay,
community and everything. Also, I've had some folks go through our Getting to 80 program that said that, if we hadn't done this, I don't think we would have survived COVID, because it really helped shape where they're going to have to move their business to. So I've heard really positive notes like that. Specific data that is coming out now from, say, BCG, so Boston Consulting Group, is really focusing on the fact that, building back better is going to look very B Corp-ish. That's the
Good to
one.
hear.
That's the one common thread. Basically we're thinking about climate, we're thinking about justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. We're thinking about all the major topics within this. We're seeing how employees were so adversely affected during COVID, for example. So all of these threads are now becoming even more important through COVID. So I would actually check the BCG site. They make a lot of their studies public, and if I have any that I can share publicly, I will share them with Jennifer after the call. I'll see what I
Great.
have that I can
Thank you
share
very much.
publicly. I'm just reading one of the questions here before I move on. I'm going to speak to the one about the cost of certification. That's always a tricky question to answer, just because it can be so different based on your business and where you're at. If you're an organization that has all your policy and procedures in place and you're measuring the things that you want to measure, the colony cost of certification is the annual certification fee, which is based on your revenues. If you're an organization that has done your first pass through the assessment, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into the assessment, perhaps you've got some work to do. And if it's just policy and procedure writing, you might be able to handle that on your own as long as you've got the capacity within your organization. If it's setting up complicated data tracking or systems and you don't have that capacity, maybe you want to hire somebody to help you with that, a consultant. So it can really vary based on the needs of your organization. So I would say, it's not a precise number or dollar amount on certification. It's based on whether or not you've got the capacity to do it internally, which I always encourage you to do first, because this really is a planning and strategy tool. And if you actually involved all your different departments, so your HR department, your legal department, etc., facilities, it really means something to them to review what they're doing. And if they have the capacity, I think that's the strongest way to go. If you don't have capacity and you need to hire somebody, there are a ton of consultants that are helping with B Corp certification. That might be able to help. And obviously even Florida for Good can help you as well. They do a lot of that work as well. So, but I always say, do your first pass, see what you can do, and then set up a plan. So I think that's the best way to be most cost effective about it as well. So that's sort of what I have in, that's what I recommend. So, yeah. All right. So we're going to continue on and we're going to talk about the B impact assessment. Now, for me, this is where the most value exists within what B Lab has created, is the B impact assessment. The current assessment is actually on version 6, so it's updated every 2 years. So it's a pretty incredible assessment 14 years later after the first one actually went out. So in this section, we're going to talk about getting started in the assessment, because it's really important to choose the right stream. We're going to talk about the areas of the assessment, the operational questions, the impact business models. We're going to talk about how to navigate within the assessment. If we have time, we'll go live into one of my test accounts. And then we'll talk a little bit about submitting and tips there as well. So getting started. As I mentioned, the B impact assessment can be used for so many different things. So it can be used to assess and compare and improve. It can be used as a planning and strategy tool. It's based on positive feedback, so it rewards you on the positive things that you are doing within your organization. It's very comprehensive, objective, and standardized. It's adaptive, As I mentioned, when you do create your first assessment, it'll adapt based on who you are as an organization. And even once you're within the assessment, it's going to ask you specific questions and it'll adapt based on your answers. And finally, it can be used for B Corp certification. So really keep that in mind about the B Impact assessment. Getting started. This piece is so important. I think it was at one point, I think it was around 50% of the submissions going into B Lab for certification, the company had actually chosen the wrong track in the assessment. So this piece is so important. So as I go through this, make some notes, think about your organization, just to make sure that you're choosing the right track from the beginning. I will say if you've already started and you realize you're on the wrong track, we can get that changed. So don't worry about that, but it just may create a little bit more work for you. So who are you certifying is the number one thing. So if you're a really simple organizational structure, you've got one business, that's a simple thing to answer. But if you are a business that owns a number of different businesses, you have subsidiaries, your partners in this business, et cetera, complicated organizational structures can be challenging. You have to actually identify what you're certifying. If you are a company that owns a holding company, so just the real estate company, and then you have an operating company, you would definitely certify the operating company, for example. So really think about this. If you've got a complicated organizational structure, I would actually check in before you actually go to certify because we want to make sure that you're looking at the right entity to certify. And in some cases, you might have to actually complete multiple B impact assessments based on how the organizational structure is actually done and what you want to achieve. So that's an important piece. So anybody with a complicated organizational structure, you can either get in touch with B Lab, and I can show you how to do that after this call, or you can speak to me and I can give you a bit of direction as well. Number two, the size of your company. So the size is based on number of employees in the B Corp world. And so number of employees is really important to understand. So if you are a brand new business and you've just got, two shareholders that are working in the business, that would be 0 employees. Shareholders can't be employees. So you would say you would choose the 0 track. If you're a company that say has 5 employees, 3 are full-time, 2 are part-time, you would have 4 employees. So there is a bit of an algorithm to consider if you've got a lot of employees and you've got some contract employees and part-time employees, etc. I will show you where you can find that information so that you can look at that prior to actually choosing anything within the assessment. So size of number of employees is really important. The other thing I'll add here is that you want to answer the assessment, especially if you're thinking about certification within the next 6 months, put where you are today. So if you have 10 employees today, put 10. Don't put 20 because you think you might grow. Choose where you are today. If you're using this as a planning and strategy tool and you know within the next year you're going to be at, say, 20 employees, choose 20. That's fine. If you choose the wrong employee size, you can change it, but you can't change it yourself. You'd have to get in touch with B Lab and I can show you how to do that. So size is a really important piece. The next 2 areas are industry and sector. So the first thing it's going to ask you about is your sector. And we're going to go through that next. This is a really wordy slide, so I apologize for that. I will share these slides with you after I'll share them with Jennifer and she can share them with everybody, so you have them as a reference. But sector means to the B impact assessment, it's really important because it will determine which questions appear for you and how detailed it get, especially in the environmental section. So there's 5 different sectors. We'll look at manufacturing first. It's a company that manufactures greater than 10% of its own products for sale or manufactures products for sale by another company or brand. Wholesale and resale is a company that sells physical products and does not own or operate manufacturing processes or facilitates responsible for the creation of those physical goods, facilities responsible for the creation of those physical goods. Services with minor environmental footprint are a company that earns revenue through the provisions of non-physical services. Company does not sell a physical product or does not own or operate a retail, wholesale, or manufacturing facility. So this might be a law firm, an accounting firm, an IT company, for example. Services with major environmental footprint is a company that works in the service industry with a material environmental footprint due to its facilities, its supply chain, or the intensity of its operations in the delivery of services. So this would be like a hotel, for example, or like a landscaping company, for example. Finally, agricultural growers. A company that operates a farm, agro-processing facility, or sources crops directly from farmers, growers for a majority of raw input materials. The only thing that's not in agricultural is livestock. So if you are you have livestock as your farm, you would actually be located in the manufacturing facility sector, pardon me. So it's important to choose which one you're in here. Once you've done all of that, you will be brought into the B impact assessment. When you're in the B impact assessment, you're going to see two prevalent boxes, and I will show you that if we have time to log in. You will see the SDG Action Manager. Now, I don't know how many people on the line are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, but they were created by the UN a number of years ago. And about a year ago, or actually it's been about 2 years ago now, B Lab got together with the UN Global Compact and actually mapped the B Impact Assessment with the SDG Action Manager, with all of the SDGs. I think this is really important work because the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, there's 17 different ones, are sort of what everybody is working towards, both from a government perspective to like a city perspective to business perspectives. Unfortunately, unless you have a really big department that is focused on this, you may not even know what the SDGs are, and you may not have the capacity to really report or do anything on them. So because of that, B Lab and the UN Global Compact partnered and created the SDG Action Manager. So when you complete your B Impact assessment, you can port all of your answers into the SDG Action Manager, and it will reflect where you're having an impact. Why is this important? You might want to pick maybe one or two of those goals and maybe improve on them. The only thing that I will caution you on is the SDG Action Manager is very detailed. It's very academic. And so it might be just too much for you at this time. So I always recommend, please don't start here. Please don't start in the SDG Action Manager. Start in the B Impact Assessment. Port your answers over. And maybe if you're really interested, start with one or two of those goals. So at this stage, that's what I recommend. But I don't want you getting confused between the B Impact Assessment and the SDG Action Manager. So within the assessment, we've been talking about these areas already, but there's the different impact areas. So we've got governance, workers, community, which includes your supply chain, environment, and the impact of your products and services. Within the assessment in these 5 different major areas, when the scoring actually happens, it will be broken down based on how you've answered when you first log in. So obviously, if you have no employees, you're not going to be very weighted in the employees section because you don't have employees, right? So it will vary, your weighting will vary based on how you answer those first questions and create your assessment. So this is an example of a manufacturing company, and the size is 10 to 49 employees. So with this particular company, the weighting would be governance is worth 5%, workers is worth 20%, community is worth 22.5%, environment is worth 22.5%, and impact business model, which we will talk more about, is worth 30%. So I share this example with you just so you know that there's different weighting systems based on your assessment and how you've answered. So don't worry if you like basically have no workers. How am I going to get to 80 if I have no workers? It's okay. It will rebalance those points based on your situation. So there are 4 kinds of questions. A gating question is it's a question that's designed to find out more about your organization. So it's going to ask you things about your organization so that it can create other questions or, determine the weighting system. And these gating questions have no points associated with them. So when you're in the assessment, you'll see that they have 0 points associated with them. So they're just questions to get to know you better. The second type are operational questions. The third type are impact business model questions. And the fourth is disclosure questions. You won't really get to the disclosure questions unless you are going to submit for certification. These questions are all made up of, they're asking you about your policy and procedures, how you measure your impact, do you have improvement goals, and what are your outcomes? So all of the questions are designed around those things. So the first section we'll talk about is the operational questions. And these are basically questions that you're doing in your day-to-day business. So they would probably be applicable to any organization. Obviously in governance, workers, community, and environment. So what I've done here is I'm going to go through each section and I'm going to show you some of the key terms in each section. And I find this is helpful because it makes you think about the types of policy and procedures that might be applicable to governance, for example. And it also gives you an idea of what you might want to have handy when you're answering these questions. So in the governance section, there's 2 sections, mission and engagement, and ethics and transparency. Some of the key terms in this sections are obviously stakeholders, materiality assessments, mission statement, board of directors, your advisory board perhaps. Do you have a whistleblowing policy? Your code of ethics, financial controls, and ethics and reputational risk assessment. So these are the key terms that are covered in the governance section. So if we look at the worker section, it's divided into financial security, health and wellness and safety, career development, engagement, and satisfaction. So some of the key terms in this section are, do you have a living wage? Unfortunately, I do have the Canadian link in my presentation. Perhaps Jennifer has a living wage link for the US. I'm not sure if it would be broken down by state or if there's a like one link to show all of the US. I'm not sure there. But you'll have to calculate whether or not you are paying a living wage. So healthcare and supplementary benefits, workplace health and safety, professional development and training, ongoing skills-based training, cross-skills training, etc., paid time off, worker flexibility. Obviously, we've been very flexible in 2020. Attrition and departed employees, an employee handbook, internal promotions. So this is the area of workers. Now, if you have contract workers and no actual workers, that will be covered in the community section. And end of employment support. Oh, great. US living wage calculator. Thank you, Jennifer. Awesome. So that's in the chat. The next section is community. I find this one very big and there's lots going on in the community section. So it's going to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, economic impact, civic engagement and giving, supply chain management. So it's going to be looking at key terms like inclusive work environment, your management of diversity, equity, and inclusion, management of diversity, or measurements of diversity, pardon me, racial or ethnic minority, unrepresented groups, low income areas, non-accredited investors. Local, which generally means about 50 miles from your organization. That would be considered local. Charitable donations, community investment, community and pro bono services. Suppliers, obviously, supply chain management is huge. So that's a big section here. So if you have an extensive supply chain, then there's an opportunity to really do some work here, and that can be a really big return on investment as well. One thing I will comment on here about suppliers, sometimes people think, well, we don't have any suppliers because we don't have a product. If you're paying your internet bill every month, you have a supplier. It may not be as diverse and you may not have as much influence over your supply chain, but you definitely will have a supply chain. So really think of it that way. And then finally, as I mentioned, outsourced staffed is included in the community section. The environment section can be really complicated based on your business or fairly straightforward. So it's going to look at environmental management, air and climate, water, land, and life. Now the key terms here there are a lot of key terms. If you're an organization that is just leasing space, your environmental impact is going to be really, really simple. You'll just really look at that space that you're leasing and look at it in that respect. If we think about it in scope 1, 2, and 3, and if you're not familiar with scope 1, 2, and 3, I would just suggest do a quick Google search, scope 1, 2, and 3, and you will get an instant array of different visuals of what scope 1, 2, and 3 actually are. Scope 1 is that simple measurement of your lease space, that type of thing. Yes, that is greenhouse gas 1, 2, and 3. It would be the same thing. Yeah, absolutely. So scope 1 are direct costs like your facility or your vehicles. So they're fairly straightforward. Scope 2 is indirect. So your fuel, your waste, your business travel, your commuting. And scope 3 are indirect costs. And that's usually where folks need a little bit more assistance, is in the indirect. So, end of life cycles, your distribution, so sources that you generally don't control. So they're a little bit more difficult to have an impact on. So definitely take a look at that, but most of you won't be in scope 3. Most of you are probably going to be in scope 1 or 2, just maybe 2, just a little bit. So the rest of the terms are specific to, certain things within the environmental process of, say, a manufacturing facility or within a building, like LEED certification, an environmental management program, cradle to cradle, for example, or certified organic, value chain impact, life cycle assessments, low impact renewable sources, certified carbon credits. So that's if you're buying offsets. As well as wastewater is included in here as well. Hazardous waste, sources reduced, product reclamation, chemicals, biodiversity, zero waste. So, sorry. So a lot going on in the environmental section, especially if you're in your manufacturing section or your farming, for example. So it can be a very complicated section. If you find that you're in a more environmentally heavy industry and you haven't set up any of these processes, I think that's where you might need some additional assistance. And while in Canada, I can definitely refer you to folks that can help you. I'm not sure in your specific areas who you might be able to get some help from, but I'll defer to Jennifer again because she might know more locally where you might be able to find some assistance if you're in that space. So those are the operational questions. For the most part, very straightforward questions, and they're designed to sort of reward you on what you're doing. So you might get 1 out of 2 points, for example. As you improve what you're doing, you might actually get full points for the question, for example. The next section of questions, which is a really important piece to what B Corp has created, is the impact business model questions. So the impact business model is designed to evaluate specific business models that create positive social or environmental impact beyond basic operational impact. So it's actually focusing on key outcomes. What I do find is when folks do the assessment on their own and they come across these impact business model questions, they think they're doing all of the impact business models, but that's not necessarily true. It's quite intensive and intentional when you have an impact business model. So I think it's important for us today to go through those impact business models just to give you a bit of an idea. So the difference between the two, I've set up a couple of examples here. So if we're looking at recycling, in the operations section, they'll ask you, do you recycle your waste? If you have an impact business model in recycling, you're selling recycling services or technology. So that's completely different. In the donation section, in the operations section, say, well, do you donate to charity? Yeah, I do. But an impact business model would be like having a buy one, give one model. So if you think about Tom's shoes, you buy a pair of Tom's shoes, they give away a pair of Tom's shoes. That would be an intentional business model that's actually been created. So that gives you an idea of sort of the difference between operation versus impact business model. There are several predefined impact business models under each section. I've given you this as a guide for all of the different ones that are available. Some of these are not available if you're in a developed country. They're in undeveloped countries only. And so what I thought I would do is go through 1 or 2 in each of these sections so that it gives you an idea of what they're all about. So the first area is governance. There's only one impact business model here. And it's a one impact business model that if you're going to become a certified B Corp, all of you will get this one impact business model, and that is mission lock. So when we discussed changing our articles of incorporation to consider all stakeholders, that is mission lock. And so most of you will have mission lock when you actually submit your for certification, and that is worth 10 points. Some folks don't have mission lock in place when they submit for certification, and that is okay. You do have up to 2 years. Most times, I think it's 1 year now, to actually change your articles of incorporation after you achieve certification. So in that case, you would not achieve your 10 points. So sometimes this will be something people will do intentionally just to get 10 additional points, for example. So this is one that is sort of a given for every B Corp certified company. They will all have mission lock. Under the worker section, there's actually only one as well, and it's worker ownership. So that's when you've got an employee ownership share program. It does have to be more than, I think it has to be at least 40% of your workers actually own the business to qualify for this. And depending on your size of company, so if you're 0 to 8 employees, I believe, you achieve 15 points for this. And if you're 30, you achieve 30 points if you're over 8 employees. This is one of the areas that is really highly valued because if you do have an ownership share program, it is quite equitable and a progressive ownership model that sort of benefits everybody equally. And that's why it's so heavily weighted. So in the community section, there are quite a few. And I've actually chosen the 2 most popular. Based on my analysis, these are probably the most popular ones in the community section. So supply chain poverty alleviation. So that recognizes supply chain strategies that reduce poverty through trade terms, positive labor conditions, and support for underserved. So you would have to have a specific program in place to achieve this particular impact business model. And the other one is designed to give, which is very, it's probably one of the most ones that's most self-explanatory. One of the companies that I really appreciate is called 10 Tree. They're an organization here in Canada, but they actually created their company because they really wanted to do something about reforestation. And so their whole company was developed around this idea of reforestation. So for every t-shirt, they're an apparel company. So for every t-shirt that you buy, they plant 10 trees and they have some pretty big goals. So they have a really strong design to give model. So while they are a great apparel company, their actual focus is on reforestation for the world. In the environmental section, these tend to be the most popular. Resource conservation, so that's pretty self-explanatory, recognizes products and services that reduce resource use, and or limit waste in the landfill. And then toxin reduction and remediation. If we think about it, my very, very first example, Annie Rouleau with the Unscented Company, she scores very well in toxin reduction and remediation. So recognizes products and services that reduce or remediate toxins or pollution. And in the customer section, I've chosen support for underserved and purpose-driven entrepreneurs. So companies whose products or services are offered to purpose-driven enterprises. And then health and wellness improvement. And I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Recognizes products and services that promote the health and wellness of individuals. So I just wanted to look at time. We're looking at, it's 9:24. So I think we still have a half an hour. Is that correct, Jennifer? Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
So if you're all game, I will take you live into the assessment and just show you how to navigate within the assessment, because I think it's important to understand that. So if you can just give me a minute, I will get logged in and then I will be able to share.
Carla, this is really incredible knowledge. I want to thank you for going through all this. I mean, I've been working with Florida for Good and helping companies certify for 2 years, and some stuff you told me I didn't even know about. I'm like the B Lab behind the scenes stuff. So I really appreciate you going through this.
Oh, that's so sweet. Well, thank you. I'm glad that it's helpful. I am constantly updating the presentation so it remains very relevant and keeps up to date. So I appreciate that greatly. All right, so now I'm going to share my screen here. Thank you for your patience. All right, and I'm just going to make this bigger. Can everybody see that fairly clear? Yeah, great, awesome, thank you. All right, so if you go to beimpactassessment.net, this is where you will get started. So for myself, I've already got an actual sort of test assessment going. And so I went into login. Now I'm going to show you login because this is where, oh, it already knows that I logged in. Okay, I'm going to do this instead. Get started. Nope, it already knows I'm there. So I can't show you that. So when you click on the login, I'm going to show you what I'll do is I'll log out afterwards and I'll show you at the end. But before you even get started, there is a blue support button that will allow you to look at a ton of resource information before you even get started. So if you're having trouble deciding how many workers or having trouble deciding which company to certify, you will have access to that information. So I will show you that afterwards for sure. Apologies because I went ahead and just logged in too quickly and then I won't be able to show you that visually, but that's okay. So we're going to go here, which is the actual assessment for my ice cream shop. Totally tested, of course. And I'm the account owner of that. You can see here at my summary, I'm scoring 38.9, but I've only completed 50% of the assessment, and I'm in version 6 of the assessment. So I'm going to click on this. And it's going to take me to the main page. It's going to move you over here. And so it's going to show you here what we're looking at. Now, what you're going to see when you create your account, I just want to go over this piece. You will see the B impact assessment, and then you will also see the SDG Action Manager, which is why I really go over that in the presentation. You really want to stick with the B impact assessment right now, and then you can go into the SDG Action Manager after. So within the B impact assessment, I'm actually in the dashboard right now. So it's showing me some basic information about what's going on in my assessment. There's a notice here from B Lab that says that they're announcing their next review for the B Corp certification requirements, and they're wondering if you want to participate and you want to be part of the survey. So they're giving you some information about things that are happening. If I go down here, it'll say that I don't have my current fiscal year end date, but I don't have financial statements, so obviously I have not added that information. And it shows me my B impact assessment. Now, when I'm within the B impact assessment, the area that I work the most in is the question filter. So that's what I'd like to show you today is the question filter. So I'm going to click on that on the sidebar here, and we're going to go into the question filter. Why I love the question filter so much is that everything is in one spot. So if I quickly scroll down, I can show you that it shows the governance section. Then it shows me mission and engagement and all of my questions under mission and engagement, ethics and transparency, and all my questions. And if I keep going down, it will show me mission locked, impact business model. That's very clearly identified. Then it'll go into the next section, workers. So this is why I like it. It's all in one place for me, and I can sort of navigate through here as I go. We're going to scroll back up, and I'm going to show you a couple other things in here that each section is summarized. So in this one, I've answered 16 out of the 21 required questions. Right now, I'm scoring 15.9 points in this section. 5.9 are coming from operational questions. 10 are coming from my impact business model score. If you scroll down, if I scroll down and I show you mission and engagement, in this particular section, I'm scoring 2.1, so it's giving me a summary. And then each one of these are the question. If you have answered the question, you will get an orange bar here. So it'll just indicate that you have answered that question. If I have not answered the question, like last fiscal year, I will not get an orange bar. So if we click on this particular question, level of impact focus, it'll actually expand the actual question. Now, instantly, I see here that the points available are 0. So I know instantly that this is a gating question. These are questions that they're just trying to get to know me for. So in this particular one, I've answered the question. I don't get any points for it because it's a gating question. Let's say I answer this question, but I'm not really sure. I need to check with a couple people. I can actually use this bookmark up here to flag it. The nice thing about that is that if you flag the question, you know which ones you want to come back to. And that is super handy because you can imagine how many questions you're going to be answering in this particular assessment. It can be hard to figure out, okay, where was that particular question? How do I get back there? So I really encourage you to use your flag button because you can actually sort based on bookmarked questions. You can also produce a report based on bookmark questions. The other thing that you can do is click on the star. Now the star is setting a goal for yourself. So if I click on star, you will see it brings me to a different screen and I can set a goal. It shows me my current answer. It shows me the other potential answers. And I might say my goal is to expand to this particular answer. And I can also say that I want to maybe achieve this within the next 6 months. And I can click on receive email reminders, and the system will automatically remind me that one of my goals is coming due. So this can be really handy in terms of strategy and planning and sort of keeping you on track. I won't actually save this right now, so I'll just cancel and get out of here. But that's how you can use these two things in the corner, star and feedback. If you click on the question again, it will collapse it. If we go to stakeholder engagement, for example, this is kind of a big question, but in stakeholder engagement, I'm going to scroll down here and it's going to show points earned, 0.38 out of 0.75. So this is actually a question that has some points associated with it. Now I have clicked on here that we have an advisory board, but nothing else. What if I decide, oh, we actually also publicly report on stakeholder engagement and mechanisms and results? If I click on that and I save, oh my goodness, there's an error. I don't usually come across this. Let me pick another question. Okay, so on this particular question, I've earned 1.06 out of 1.06. But let's say I change my questions. And let's see if it's going to let me do this right now. Ah, for some reason, there's an error. I think what I'm going to do here is just, interesting. Oh, great. The network seems to be down at B-Lab, from what I can tell anyways. We will try one other thing. Ah, unfortunately, our network has gone down. Now, I won't be able to show you as much. Let me see if the support button's working. Ah, it is. So that's a good thing. Okay. So in the meantime, while I can't show you the questions and the question filter and how to navigate in there, what I will show you is the support button. So the support button is located on every single page that you're in the assessment, even in the very first page when you go to log in. So this support button is actually available to you prior to you creating an account. This is super important because any of your questions, you can probably have them answered here. So if I actually type in number of workers, choosing assessment, your assessment track size, sector, location will come up. If I click on that, it gives me actually all of the information I need in order to make those choices. So you can click on size down here and it will actually show you how to calculate what exactly you have in terms of workers based on full-time employees, part-time employees, how many hours they work, etc. So all of that information is here. You can also take a look at that sector and industry information that I mentioned. It's all right here as well, which is really, really helpful. I was just going to try to find, there's one other one about organizational structure. Here's one that often comes up, so I'm going to go into it anyways, is assessing a company with multiple locations. this actually comes up a lot because sometimes they're like, well, which one do I report on in terms of our environmental impact? It's all outlined here for you as well. So any of these questions that you have, you can type into this and take a look at. There's actually one other way to take a look at this information. So overview of preparing for assessment review, for example. If I click on that, it will take me into um, what's called the B Impact Assessment Support Solution articles. So this is actually the main area for the information that is actually in that support button. If we look at the home button, it used to be called knowledge base and you actually had to access it outside of the assessment, but now you can access all of this information here. And this is really, really helpful. So it's, everything is here in terms of the articles and helpful tips in each area, guidance for taking the assessment, overview of version 6 changes. The SDG Action Manager help is here. You can actually take a look at the different areas. So environmental best practices, employee best practices. So it really is an area that's so important for you as you go through the assessment. It becomes your resource area. The other thing that you can do in this section is actually when you're in your impact assessment, you can actually say, like I need to create a ticket because I need some support, and you can do that through here as well. So this will actually contact the standards team directly if you need some help. You would do this, for example, if perhaps you picked, 1 to 8 employees, but now you're actually above that and you need to change the size of your company. You would create a new support ticket to do that here. So everything is live and active for you right here. So really important piece for you today to take note of. And again, you can just access this through the blue support button and you can find it. I also have a list of links that will take you directly to this that I'll share with Jennifer afterwards. We're going to test one more time to see if we can get back into the question filter. We're back in. Great. So there must have been just some kind of blip. So the next thing I want to show you is that when you're in the question filter, you can actually print off all of your questions, if you like, in a PDF format. You can download the assessment into an Excel spreadsheet. For me at BDC, we're a very large organization, so I need to work with lots of different departments when we go through our certification. So I download the assessment and give them their questions that way. They can also log directly into the assessment, but I find that it just works better for me if there's only one person changing the answers in the actual assessment. So I use it to download in an Excel format. The filter is really handy because in here you can filter what shows up here. So I can actually say I only want to see the operation questions, or actually I'm going to go back and say impact business model questions only. And it'll actually take out everything except for the impact business model questions. So kind of handy if you're just looking at one specific area, because you can actually pick out just the one area that you want to look at as well. You can look at attributes, you can look at the point factor, so you can really sort it if you want here. Under attributes, this area is really about when you're communicating with the standards team. So they're going to actually make notes in this assessment for you as you're working with them. And they'll maybe put a note that it requires verification. And then they'll put some information here so you can sort it by those attributes if you're going through certification here as well. So really handy section. I have sorted out the impact business models here. So this particular impact business model is about arts, media, and culture. So I'm just using this as an example. So if I look at this question here, I say that my product or services has a core purpose of independent journalism. And because I did this, I actually got all of those other questions you noticed. But I'm going to change it and say that these descriptions do not apply to me. And I'll save it. You'll notice here it is a gating question. There's 0 points. And I'll save it. What happens then is that when I go out of this question, all of those other questions disappeared because they don't need to actually provide them to me anymore. But if I go back in and say that I do journalism and I save it, you'll see they reappear. So sometimes the gating questions will unlock further questions for you based on how you're answering. So we're going to go back here and we're just going to have everything show up and everything will be back. So this is the area that I find most helpful to work in. I go directly here whenever I'm working in anybody's assessment because everything is here. You can look at in the other sections here, but I just don't find it as helpful. So the next thing I'm going to show you is reports. These are all really straightforward. We'll look first at the B impact report. Now this report is going to give me a summary of my assessment. So currently I'm at 38.9. And remember when I told you there's another 100,000 users of this B impact assessment? This is where you see how you're doing comparatively. So this number right here in the white, the 38.9, is me, my ice cream shop. The next number is 49.4. This 49.4 represents all of the other companies that are similar to mine that are currently using the assessment and where they're scoring. So they're slightly higher than I am. The green number, the 80, is obviously where I need to get to for certification. The 131 is the medium score of the Best for the World honorees. So these are B Corp certified companies. And no doubt Ben and Jerry's is here. And they're doing a lot more work than I am, that's for sure. So it gives you a little bit of feedback of where you are on the spectrum. And it's even more, it gets even better once you've completed the entire assessment. I haven't done that quite yet. You can also look at it per section and per subsection, and it'll also show you your points based on your impact business model as well. The next area I want to show you is the bookmark report. As I mentioned, you can use the bookmark in the corner and it'll basically show you all of the things that you have a bookmark on. So it's sometimes easier just to go straight in here, but you can actually filter that out in the question filter as well. The improvement report is very handy as well. It will come up with anything that you've set a goal for, but it'll also automatically generate some questions that the system feels might be areas that you could improve on. So there's suggested improvements, which is kind of handy if you're sitting at the 70 points and you just need to really look at areas that you might be able to improve on to get to that 80 point before you submit. This section can be kind of helpful. It's not necessarily something you can for sure do. They're just suggestions. And so basically that is the how to navigate within this system. And hopefully that will be helpful for you when you actually get started in the system and start your journey towards B Corp certification. Any questions on this before we leave here?
Yeah, Carla, I have a question. You know what, when they like with the governance, for example, when you were in the question filter, it showed like the overall score and then it showed operational, IBM and NA score. Is NA score, are those the gating questions?
Yeah.
On some assessments, I see the NA score, it has like a number value. And
and I think that refers to, from what I've noticed and what I've never actually asked this question, but I think what it is if you've chosen an impact business model, but it's not really going to be accounted within your assessment, that's where it shows those scores. That's generally what it is. It's basically you've been awarded points on something that's not really valid within your assessment, and that's what it'll show you there.
And will those bottom three scores, the operational, IBM, and NA, all those three contribute to the overall score, correct?
Yes, they do. That's correct.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, I mean, I'm not sure, but I would like to see if it comes up. Aha, here we go. There you go. So if you have a question like that, you can just pull it up. So not applicable points that are in questions that are redistributed to remaining questions in that impact area rather than your company earning no points. So that actually makes sense. So it's the gating questions that are determining whether or not, you know, you have these things.
Great.
So there you
Thank
go.
you.
There's the full explanation. That's how handy the support button is.
That was good.
Yeah.
And also I wanted to mention to everybody on the call that if you are going through your assessment and you want to, if you need help getting through the assessment, if say you don't have enough staff in your company, and if you would like some student help, like through universities, I can put a form link in the chat, and it's free student help, and we have universities all through the United States, and there's probably some in Canada that once you fill out the form, we can kind of connect you to those different regions. So we've got like a couple universities in Georgia, a couple in Florida, in North Carolina. And so I'll do that. So if you're interested in getting student help to help you through the impact assessment, it'll be a really great resource for you.
Thank you. So I'll pop out of here and we'll go back into my presentation. There's just a few things I want to go through um, with you to close out. There we go. So are you ready to submit? There's just a few things I want to talk about submission right now. And it's really important to understand if you get to this point. I don't know, maybe we can use the hand button, just a show of hands of how many people are really wanting to submit for certification on the call today. I'm just curious. Okay, I don't see any hands, but oh, I see one. Great, awesome, thank you. Excellent. So submission right now can take some time. The actual queue for the standard analysts is very, very long. And so if you submit today, you might not hear back from them. You'll hear back from them right away, but they may not actually pick up your submission for 6 months right now. Unfortunately, we only have so big of a standards team. And when it increases, we need to then look at our capacity, hire new employees, train them up. So it can be really tough. And so right now, just have a lot of patience with B Lab is what I'm requesting, because they're doing the best that they can to keep up with the volume that's coming in. But one of the main things that I'm mostly concerned about right now are for those folks that submit, but maybe don't have a complete package. And that and then they wait for 6 months, their application is picked up, and then unfortunately they're told, well, you don't have a complete package, go back, redo it. So really, really, really find as much information as you can, go through all of the self-help if you're submitting on your own. But some of the major areas is that every single time you answer a question, make sure that you have documentation to support that answer. So you need to have either a policy procedure or, the data or, proven outcomes, etc. That number one is really important to have all of that handy. If you submit on the double check or check in maybe weekly within your assessment, log in and take a look, because that's how the standards team will communicate with you. They will also communicate with you via email. So you'll want to make sure that that email is not going to junk. So make sure that you're able to see that information and double check. If you're a small enterprise, so 0 to 9 employees, you can go on a fast track if you've actually done your legal change already. You can complete the BIA. Make sure that you have above 80 points, because as you go through the certification process, you may lose points based on some of the answers that you've given that don't really qualify for points. So on average, I always say at least submit with about 85 to 90 points if you can. that will give you a bit of buffer. It can also go the other direction and you can gain points that you didn't realize that you didn't have. So it can go either way. Like I said, in the small enterprise section, if you have met your legal obligation, you kind of go into a little bit more of a fast track. So you'll want to make sure you have that done. And like I say, just really watch for communication from the standards team. They'll do it either through your assessment or through email, and try not to miss that. Because that's what we find a lot of the time. Folks basically have missed emails, or they're no longer interested, or a number of different things, or they don't have a complete package. They maybe haven't chosen the right impact business models, etc. So hopefully my presentation today will allow you to sort of get on the right track there, and you have some understanding around this as you start your journey, but really important to know. And for larger organizations, there's a lot more involved. So if you are in a larger organization, I would say, more than 20 to 30 million a year, you might end up in the large enterprise track, or the multinational track if you're that big. And in that section, there's a lot more involved. So you'll have a discovery phase, a scoping phase. There's a lot more involved there. So it's a bit more complicated than the regular small to medium size. So just some things to keep in mind if you are ready to submit your certification. Submission is done all through that B impact assessment. It's all done through there, and there is a step-by-step guide that will help you get to that point. So I do have some useful links here. I will share actually in an email some more links for you. I'll share that with Jennifer, and she can share it out to all of you from there. So that is formally the end of my presentation. I really hope that you found it helpful, that it gives you enough information to get started on your journey. I always recommend that everybody does a first pass through, answer what you can, flag what you can't, or bookmark what you can't answer. That'll give you an idea of kind of where you're sitting and how much work you have to do. But like I say, use it as a living document, because it is really an amazing assessment tool.
Thank you so much, Carla. And yeah, I think everybody on the call is ready to start measuring their impact, and this is excellent. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, go ahead. I will, just to let everybody know, I'll be emailing out the, did you say the deck could be emailed or not?
Yeah, I will send a PDF of just the portion of the B impact assessment deck. So that I find quite helpful for folks. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'll do that, and I'll send out the recording and then the resource links as well.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Carla.
Well,
great job.
Thank you so much. Thanks for attending today.
Thank you, Carla. Amazing stuff.
Great, amazing. All right, have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks,
Jennifer, too.
Bye.
Can I ask a quick question?
You sure can. I'm still here.
So I'm a part of one of those student consulting groups that Jerry was talking about. And I have a question. We're working with a client right now. And in the impact assessment portal, one of the sections, like points are broken down either into impact business model, operations, or NA score. And my question is about NA score and basically clarifying that that counts towards the final number, because right now it's included, and I just want to make sure that is the case for the certification as well.
I think it's redistributed, if I read that correctly, but what I would recommend you doing is going into the support and type in NA score, and it'll give you a full description there of that.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carla.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Thanks. Thanks.